This is Deep Down, and I'm your host, Jordan Hunt. This season I'm going to be having conversations with like-minded friends and colleagues, musicians, artists, writers, dancers, and other creative folk, interspersed with some solo episodes where I delve deeper into life as a self-releasing musician and artist. I hope you'll join me and that you enjoy this second season of Deep Down. Hello, welcome Deep Down. I'm so glad you're joining me today. It's just me again, and I'm at home in my little cozy zone, and I've been looking around, spotting things I should probably let go of. Things that I probably should have let go of a long time ago. And I feel like I've been on quite an extended train of thought over these past few episodes. Thinking about burnout in episode 5, Can I Get Off This Ride? And about how I upcycle my music and my other possessions, like my collection of jars, in episode 3. And then I've been thinking back to some of the episodes at the end of my first season, A Little Night Music, where I discussed how it feels easier to access musical and creative flow when it goes dark outside, and also in What Keeps Me Up at Night, where, prompted by a restless, sleepless night, I disclosed where my mind wanders musically when it's unhindered by the bounds of my daytime schedule, but also how painful the realization was that I spend so little focused time on the one thing that truly matters, probably due to the necessity to make a living as a freelance musician. And I think, as I might have mentioned before, that important thing is my mantra: make music, share music, move people. And although that's a phrase or a value that I think I'm still working towards, it's definitely something that spurs me on, this idea of simplifying to the point where I just make music and share music and move people, which is really what motivates me. Effectively, the idea is to clear the backlog and just release all of my music so I can move on with my life and create more new music in order to share. Anyway, to get to the subject of today's episode, I was scrolling online this week and came across an image that was, I guess, a meme. There was some hand-painted words on a wall, and it really resonated with me. To paraphrase, they said something like, if you're tired of being the one to keep things afloat, then let the ship sink. And I assume it was talking about relationships. You know, if you're always the person calling the friend to make the arrangements and it never quite comes to fruition, then maybe it's okay to let that effort go. And if the relationship stagnates, then that's cool. Although what sprung to mind when I read it was a literal image of a ship sinking very, very slowly through a body of water, the sea, sinking to the ocean floor, deep down. And obviously I reamed off a few of my song titles there, the title of this podcast. But I think the reason it struck a chord with me was that it was a beautiful way of effectively saying, let go. Let go of everything that isn't serving you right now, or let go of unrequited effort, where you end up pouring energy into people or situations just out of habit rather than because they're nourishing you. Or let go of trying to stay afloat, where you're gasping for air at the surface, when things are calmer and more connected and true to self deep down. And let go of the pain you're holding on to from previous scenarios because you still claim it as part of your identity. And also let go of potential ideas that are no longer for you anymore, that have had their time and place in the past, even if they haven't come to fruition. I could no doubt continue in the same vein for a long time along this line of thinking. And I'm sure there are thousands of pseudo-psychological social media posts that say much the same thing in probably a more effective way, so I shan't labour the point. But from my perspective, amidst the chaos of a packed schedule of things that I don't particularly want to let go of, projects that I'm taking part in, relationships and partnerships that I'm committed to simply because I have always been committed to them, rather than because I've sought them out or because they keep me energized and connected. This idea of letting go is profoundly cathartic. I mean, the idea of it alone felt like a big sob inside my body, as I'd finally clocked exactly what my body needs to flourish, which is probably to let go of things that I'm holding on to and things I'd forgotten I'd been holding on to for many years, if not decades, and to try and embrace that newfound lightness. And so now the task is to find what those unnamed things are, to isolate them and to finally let go of them and let the ship sink. Often when you're in the thick of things, just getting on with it, it's quite difficult to spot these areas of your life where there are things that you probably should try letting go of. So it's quite useful to have these external prompts to remind you and to set the mind and the heart at work. And when I saw this phrase online, I immediately thought, that's a song. And rather more promptly than usual, I started to actually draft some lyrics. And the sensation felt familiar, and the need to let go was very keen, although without naming any names. The person whom the song was initially about didn't immediately come into view, possibly because after years of disappointment, I'd already buried any expectations of resuscitating a working, dynamic relationship. Suffice it to say, the face has since come into view, and it's been a difficult pill to swallow. I know Taylor Swift can rinse her experiences with her exes for a double album's worth of music, but somehow I feel immense guilt to even say the person's name that I'd even be writing this unfinished song about. Perhaps I have something to learn from Taylor Swift about writing my side of the story. Weirdly though, I'm not sure if I'm ready to let that particular ship sink with that person. Though sometimes you don't have to. You could even let your own ship be sunk by someone else, which can be a blessing in disguise sometimes. I was considering doing an episode about being ghosted at one point, which is a strangely familiar occurrence in my line of work as a teacher, and has also been a huge factor working with a specific producer who has never been in touch since we worked together a few years ago, which was a very strange experience. Yeah, maybe that's what needed to happen for me to be where I am today. And in recent months, I've actually had other situations where, rather than letting go, I have been let go of. Namely, being on the teacher panel of a London Borough teaching service, where I was doing deputised work covering other violin teachers in the borough who might call in sick. And when I started with them, back in 2016-17, I think it was, I effectively had a permanent position as one of the teachers. But if I were honest with myself, I think I already decided deep down that the day I left their permanent roster of teachers back in 2018, that work wasn't for me. And I covered a couple of shifts over the following year, but did so more and more reticently, having grown away from that style of teaching, because I felt less and less connected to that style of work. It just definitely was not my place of magic or how I teach when I'm at my best. And it took me at least 5 or 6 years of constantly renewing my 0-hour contract as a deputy teacher on the panel before I was far removed enough from that work, and I guess close enough to who I wanted to be moving forwards, to be able to let go of that post. Although it's sort of ridiculous, because by this point, earlier this year, it was a position in all but name, as I wasn't taking or being asked to cover any work anymore. So it was more a matter of going through the motions to clear the weeds, i.e. me, from their administrative workload. And the lightness I felt afterwards, having been let go of, was quite a mixed sensation. I thought I would be more anxious about the fact that this theoretically stable potential income was no longer there. But actually I was surprised to feel free of that connection, and the loop was finally closed. And so my mind is now an iota more free to move towards what was actually meant for me. And then strangely, it's almost as though the universe were taking notes. A very similar thing happened again not very long after that. So until very recently, I was an examiner on the music theory panel for one of the UK music exam boards. And due to the changeover of their administrative team, which in the past was very well-meaning but maybe not all that organised, they just didn't give me enough warning in advance to put exam marking periods in my diary. And in order to mark these papers, you literally need to put aside around 10 days of solid concentration to mark the ginormous box that arrives on your doorstep via courier. So the past few years, I just hadn't been able to mark any of the papers or give them 10 days in a row free due to prior work commitments. And then recently I noticed a flurry of emails from that board who seemed to have finally gotten their act together in the organisation and administration side of the department, perhaps with new management. But either way, they finally cottoned on to the fact that I was a now inactive member of their panel, and as I didn't have availability to mark this spring, they would no longer be renewing my contract, which again was a 0-hour contract. And having two such similar blows to my work life so soon after each other was a strange sensation. And it was as though the universe was saying, this is a freebie. Rather than you having to let go of these situations, we're going to let go of you instead. This is no longer for you. I have to say I was incredibly grateful for the work from both institutions at a time when I needed it most. But thankfully I'm in a different place now and really enjoying private teaching, which is what most of my teaching work is. And I've definitely done my dues in the schools. I think it was coming on to 15 years by the time I finally stopped teaching in schools. And although teaching whole class violin to some disinterested Year 4 children can be enjoyable and funny at times, it was a bit more like crowd control than teaching. And I've realised with some confidence now that it's just not my place of magic. And nobody's going to become rich or even really earn a London living wage as a music theory examiner, where you earn between £1 and £3 per paper, depending on the grade. It was really more of a challenging, fun pastime for retired music professors, I think, who probably treat it more like a Sudoku puzzle on a Sunday afternoon, and they can just do it in their sleep. But for me, it was a bit more hard work. Neither of those work positions really serves me any longer, either financially or spiritually. And I realise I'm in a very lucky position to be able to choose to take on work, for the most part, opting to streamline the production behind the scenes as much as possible. I don't have the bandwidth really to be able to sustain my writing and performing and private teaching and all of my commitments to Theo Adams Company and Olivia Cheney and so on, and then also keep up positions that don't really energize me or challenge me or invigorate me or keep me happy in the best way, or that help me grow. And after years, I mean more than a decade, as a young and not so young artist living on the breadline, I do know how to live off next to nothing, and if I had to, I would do so. Of course, I sort of joke that I've been let go of in these situations, but if I'm honest with myself, it's me who's sown the seed letting go of my sense of responsibility or duty or connection to these work commitments, to the point that the only solution was for the kind administrators to put me out of my misery. And I feel a little guilty and embarrassed about that approach, rather than having been upfront about my feelings about those jobs. But in my no guilt, no shame approach to 2024 and beyond, that was my New Year's resolution last year, I am grateful that nobody was seriously harmed in the recording of this podcast. And despite the way things panned out, it's all good, and I imagine everyone is now ultimately better off. In some ways, I feel the only reason I'm still functioning and surviving as a freelance musician in London is due to this diversification of my portfolio career, to use that trendy phrase. And perhaps the only reason that I am able to consistently pay the rent is because I haven't let any of my ships sink. I mean, on the whole, I would say yes to almost anything that's vaguely related to my skill set, or at least not completely unrelated, and that fits comfortably enough in my calendar. And some of these things that I'm asked to do can be truly bonkers and really stretch the boundaries of what it means to be a professional musician, or whatever it is that I might call myself on my tax return. At the other end of the spectrum, in terms of career and work focus, I'm reminded of a conversation I had probably in my early 20s with my then composition teacher David Horn, who was discussing how he ultimately decided to focus on being a composer rather than a concert pianist. And by the time he was teaching me, this is maybe 20 years ago now, he was in his early 30s and was very well established on the British and international contemporary music scene as a composer of extremely virtuosic and vivid and dynamic music. And as I came under his tutelage before the internet was everybody's first port of call for all things search related, I'm not sure to Google was even a verb back then, he had to tell me himself how when he was 19 he wrote a piano concerto and then performed the solo part himself at that year's BBC Proms concerts, which I imagine was incredibly demanding and stressful, and to do either of those things must be incredibly taxing and enjoyable as well, but to do both was just mind-boggling, considering how many hours a day a concert pianist has to practice and how many hours a day a composer of his merit, already then signed to Boosey and Hawkes publishers, must have been expected to write for to fulfill his commissions and demands for new work. So it came to a head at that Proms concert, apparently, where he made the decision to finally focus his energies on composing. And for a mere mortal like myself, who had never even had a composition lesson until the age of 18, facing such an enormous life-changing decision at that age seemed crazy and very unrelatable. And it seemed quite poignant that he had to ultimately let the piano part of his career go, or at least his burgeoning career as a concert pianist, in order to make space and time for composing, as well as teaching to make ends meet. It's not like he couldn't suddenly play piano anymore. He's still probably one of the best piano players I've ever met, and incredibly fast at sight reading, especially very tricky contemporary classical stuff. But it was very inspiring that he decided to let that ship sink in order that he could concentrate on composing and teaching young composers like myself at the time. I can't say I've truly dared or even seriously contemplated letting go of one or any of the major strands of my musical life, be it playing violin, albeit sporadically, or singing, or playing piano, or teaching, or even composing songs versus composing classical music. So far I've done what you might consider a little of each, though with the added inflation effect of social media coverage, people are often rather bamboozled by the array of things that I do, though if they shadowed my day-to-day life, they may realise how little of the time I spend is actually creating stuff. My point is that I don't think I've ever been brave enough to truly throw myself into a monothematic career trajectory in a kind of all or nothing way. And as I've mentioned before, I've probably soothed myself by reckoning that I can't afford to do that in order to maintain a living. And the voice in my head, perhaps an echo of my upbringing, might say that decisions like that are indulgent and not for me, and that I can't afford to burn bridges in case I need to get off this sinking island back to the safety of the mainland. But perhaps that's just fear, and a fear of discomfort talking. I've already proved to myself that I can live off nothing, not through choice, but maybe necessity. And if I were to flounder in a hyper-focused career path, then no doubt I'd never actually let myself be destitute. So what is it that's holding me back? I've got two friends from music college who are, or both were, trumpet players, in fact. And it's a notoriously unforgiving instrument, and it needs daily practice, even when you're not working, in order to maintain your embouchure, which is the muscles around your mouth and the way all of that works on the mouthpiece. And they've each given up the instrument for their own reasons. And I think in either case, this monothematic approach to a career, committing so fully to the instrument at the cost of all else, eventually led to unhappiness. In order to embrace their lives a bit more fully, they switched careers in quite a dramatic way, at least from the outside, and both now seem much happier for it. I really admire their bravery to be able to let go and embrace a new path in life. And it's extremely inspiring to know that there is life to be had on the other side of this music malarkey, which can be so incredibly draining on the spirits, especially when you're not supported by a manager or a label or publisher or an orchestra, etc. None of which I have. And I certainly draw heavily on my reserves of willpower daily to keep going, despite thrashing forwards into the void. And I'm always re-energized to read messages from listeners of my music and of this podcast, who remind me to keep going and making and sharing work, even when it's hard. Closer to home, my partner has recently undergone a huge change of his own, letting go of his career as a dancer and performer. Until about the last year or so, he'd been working almost without a pause in the theatre and on stage in various capacities. In the West End, in musicals as a child, and then as a ballet and contemporary dancer and choreographer in works from his late teens until earlier last year. And I know he's widely acknowledged among his peers to be an incredibly gifted dancer who always gives 150% no matter what the role. And in my truly unbiased opinion, was often objectively the most technically gifted dancer on stage at any moment in works I've seen him in. And it's truly mind-boggling to me in one regard that he could even consider letting go of such a gift, with surely a bulletproof trajectory to greatness on the horizon. But over the past few years, I've also seen how, in short, dancing didn't make him happy. He's really enjoyed choreographing as well, and is also immensely talented at that. And you may have come across a series of dance films that he has choreographed for my EP To the Ocean Floor, following his position as young associate at Sadler's Wells in London. But effectively, he's letting go of dance. We've actually got a few of those videos unreleased that need some final tweaks sat on my hard drive, and I will be releasing those in the coming months, so look out for them. But to return to my point, he's freeing himself of the pressure and sense of duty he felt to be able to move on to other exciting ventures, namely becoming a videographer. And he's documenting dance and other artistic processes on film and this podcast. And he's extremely lucky that he's got options, and it's so rare in life to be able to choose between a range of great talents. And I'm constantly in awe of his decision to be able to make such a clear and decided choice to stop dancing as his main source of income. These are, of course, enormous life-changing decisions that I'm talking about, rather than the kind of Marie Kondo categories of letting go of objects in your house, like my beautiful jar collection, which I don't think I will ever let go of. Of course, under all of her categories, some things are easier to let go of than others, and sentimental items are often the hardest to let go of. And in terms of my work life, some things are more sentimental than others, and in terms of trying to streamline my work and life, the hardest thing that I found to let go of is long-term dreams or goals that are rather fantastical, that at one point may have been exciting and achievable and energizing, but now when I think about them, they've got a tang of guilt for having never really gotten round to them or finished them. For me, one such long-term dream is to write a large-scale opera, which is a very big project that has been on my mind and weighing on my heart for a very long time now, probably 20 years or more since I was a student, I think. I've actually written a couple of chamber operas and even one 6-word opera, and they've been performed multiple times, and I've had commissions, and I've made money from selling tickets, and I've had lots of fun producing them, and there was even a role that I played in one of them, and I conducted another one. I absolutely adore opera, and it's been very formative to me as a composer and singer. And over the years I've been on opera writing courses and residencies, and was even starting a large-scale opera about 20 years ago with renowned actress and director Fiona Shaw, who was writing the libretto. It was a small team of 2, and sadly it never came to fruition, partly because the libretto wasn't finished, but partly because I was a bit distracted about my approach to writing the music. And it's one of my biggest regrets that I didn't really seize that opportunity at that moment and put more focus and vigour into it as a project. But I'm also greatly relieved that I wasn't thrust into the spotlight under the gaze of harsh critical judgment at a young age, not quite fully formed musically with no real life experience. I think I was writing some pretty different music back then to what I have found is my niche these days. Going through the process of trying to put that piece together with Fiona was an enormous learning curve, and the fact that there was not a finished piece to show for it is not the point. Ever since then, I promised my friend Anne Cuddigan, who's a great fan of opera, that I shall complete that work, or that I shall at least write another grand, large-scale opera and have it performed. And as the years pass, and every time I visit her, I have to reply, no opera yet, I'm afraid. And I always feel a little stab of guilt and regret. But at the same time, I have had no external impulse or energetic impulse to make it happen, with all the other things that draw my attention in my musical work life. And yet in that roughly 20-year period, I've never actually admitted to her or to myself, I really doubt that this project will ever happen, and I have to let that idea go. I'm not sure what exactly I've been holding on to, other than a very exciting memory of working with Fiona that's kept me buoyed for many years. And it may seem rather defeatist as an approach. I'm not suggesting that people should not follow their dreams, they absolutely should. But somehow I don't think that this dream of writing and putting on this wonderful opera is really on my active dream list at the moment. There are countless other priorities before I get on with that project, namely releasing my 2 albums worth of music first, think all I'm extemporizing on here is that some dreams are more like memories of dreams, and I'm not sure that even if I were commissioned tomorrow, I would be able to jump straight back into that fantasy and bring it to reality once again. Of course, there is something about the element of support that a commission brings that does so much of the heavy lifting, and it's possibly worth exploring in another episode one time. As for what else I ought to let go of in my work life, I think I need to do some more thinking on that subject. I mean, judging from my last solo episode, Can I Get Off This Ride, about burnout, I clearly have an overwhelming urge to lighten my workload, or at least lighten the burden of commitments that I have in my life. And of course, as I keep saying to my friends, it's all very well saying, take a day off. But I'm not sure there's any one thing on my plate at the moment that I'd gladly see the back of. I'm extremely lucky to enjoy what I do, but I do feel I'd enjoy each of them a whole lot more if there were fewer things to focus on. Of course, like I said at the start, there's more than one way to interpret this phrase, let the ship sink, in terms of the image of the literal sinking ship to the bottom of the ocean floor. And in one regard, as a highly sensitive person, and mostly introvert, I often long for connection in conversation, and I can flounder energetically to maintain small talk. And that's one of the main reasons I don't like house parties or dinner parties, or any kind of parties where I might have to make an effort to socialise with new people. I'm not a total misanthrope. I do love my friends, and I do love meeting new people when I have the energy and when we click. But sometimes the process of finding these people, if you're sifting through small talk, can be kind of draining. So to take the advice to let the ship sink and to allow these surface interactions with people to go deeper, as I want to do in these deep down episodes. Stopping trying to keep things light and afloat for the sake of societal norms, not being afraid to go deep down, where you can really connect with someone on a deeper level. I love that way of conversing, and I hope that reflects in my conversation episodes. Not so long ago, in fact, I met one of my dearest and probably newest friends while on a group holiday to celebrate a friend's birthday. And I think my friends know me well enough to know that my presence in that sort of group dynamic was potentially taxing on little old sensitive me. And they did everything they could to give me my own time and space. I mean, they literally gave me my own little grotto of an apartment to stay in on this sort of campus arrangement of little villa houses. But actually, the conditions were perfect for me to get to know a new person very quickly and intensely over the course of a week. And it's such a joy to know her. A few days into the trip, we were talking on a beautiful walk through this local Italian town one evening, and we were discussing this idea of how many layers of the onion had been revealed during our conversations. And of course, for me, Mr. Share-It-All, that was par for the course, but I think for her, it was quite an exceptional experience to be so vulnerable and to share so much with someone new so quickly. And I believe our friendship is all the stronger for it. So I'd certainly urge you to go deeper and let the ship sink in conversation with your friends. Don't let the friends go. But whenever you have the opportunity to really talk deep down, I'd also urge you to do the same process within yourself in all senses. Deep down, this image I have of the ship sinking so slowly, it's almost in slow motion. And it's a bit like the process of getting to know yourself. It can be a very lengthy one and a very slow one. But by becoming best friends with yourself and daring to think and feel more deeply and stopping distracting yourself with busyness on the surface and being slower and calmer and more mindful, can reap enormous benefits. I think everyone should have their own deep thinking podcast. This other interpretation that I've touched on of going deeper by letting the surface scrabble and content of a day-to-day life sink like that ship is such a wonderful image in so many ways, and is representative of why I wanted to make this podcast in the first place. It's certainly been helpful for me to get my thoughts in order, and I hope it's of some value to you to consider some of these questions. Thanks so much for taking the time to listen to me today, and try listening to yourself a bit more by taking a moment to let the ship sink and go deeper. I'm sure the journey will be worth it. Don't forget to subscribe, follow, and review this podcast, and if you like it, share it with your friends or on social media. You can find me on social platforms at Deep Down with Jordan Hunt and at Jordan Hunt Music. Deep Down uses bits of my music from my song Ocean Floor, and you can listen to my music on all streaming services. I'd love to hear from you via DM or via my website, jordan-hunt.com, if any of these experiences resonated with you, and there you can sign up to the mailing list for announcements and updates. Thank you so much for listening.